Welcome to the Calling the Quarters podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today I am interviewing my friend Kaynek Young, who is a pagan and a writer. And I really wanted to get a chance to talk to her because we've had so many wonderful, insightful conversations. I kind of wanted to share that with all of you as well. If you've been following the podcast at all, you're going to notice that this is the first episode I've had since October. And I've had kind of a hiatus for a while because, well, life happens, and just that's all I'm going to say about that. And I think somebody probably told me, I hope you live in interesting times, and well, that happened. So without further ado, I want to thank you all for your wonderful patience and sticking with the podcast and listening to it. I've gotten such good feedback from the public on the podcast, and I really want to continue doing it now that I've had some time to kind of regroup, as it were. So I'm going to take you now to my conversation with my good friend and somebody who I admire and think very highly of. I'm just not, doing this is not filler. I really wanted to talk to this person and have them on the podcast because they're somebody I respect and whose opinion I value very highly. So I just wanted to share their stories with you. And I'm glad I did. After listening to some of the edits and some of the things that were said, I was so happy that I had this conversation, and I think you're going to be happy to listen to it as well. On we go. Welcome to the Calling the Quarters podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today, I have on the podcast my friend and fellow pagan, Kaynek Young. Kaynek, welcome to the podcast.
Dean, at last, I'm on your podcast. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on it. I've wanted you on for a while, and I'm glad we got a chance to do this together. I know that life's been crazy for both of us.
Yes, yes, it has.
Now, for our listeners who are not familiar with you, can you give a little bit of a background on yourself and tell us about yourself and where you're from?
Well, let's see. I was born in San Francisco in 1970, so, a whole age ago. But I've lived up and down the West Coast for a good part of my life, predominantly Alaska and the Bay Area, where I'm currently living.
At what time in your life did paganism come into your life?
I think it's more for me, it's more of a question of when wasn't it there? My
Yeah.
family's Scotch-Irish. I wouldn't say that we had a family tradition, so to speak, but with both sets of grandparents having come from the old country, the old lands, there were a lot of little things that stuck. My mother having grown up in the South as a Southern woman who was also Irish, so there was double helpings of everything, both food and guilt and spirituality of sorts. There were always little things that were never fully explained. We left butter out for certain things, or there was times when you didn't say walk under the shadow of a tree, but it was never explained as why. It was always just hinted at.
Were you raised with pagan ideals or beliefs? Did they, like you said, they left butter out and stuff like that, but did you
Mhm.
feel that there was some of a kind of a conscious kind of practice that was done from like the old country?
Quite possibly. My dad was a mountain man, and so he had a deep affinity for hunting and fishing in the backcountry. So we spent a lot of time up there in Alaska and lived up there for parts. And it was always about nature. My mother was the same way too. And we grew up on a farm, so we were exposed to a lot of things, the cycles of life and death and birth and the steps that you take to help that. But as for being pagan or having pagan roots, it was never said out loud. It was just sort of this is what we do.
Was your family like practicing? I don't mean you specifically, but was your
Mhm.
family like practicing Christian? Did you go to church?
I'm laughing because that's a yes and a but and a no and an and sort of answer.
Hmm.
My parents were, I would say that they were church touched, my mother more so, but they didn't try to get my sister and I involved with the church until middle school. And by that
Yeah.
point, it was really too late. I remember months of shopping around, looking at various churches, and my sister and I were like, oh, no, no, thank you. And particularly with some of the faiths, when they would get into their strict restrictions and their rulings about women, it was like, nope. Even then, both my sister and I knew back then that we were rather staunch feminists, although that word wasn't bandied around the house.
So, did you at some point like read a book or join a coven, or when did you kind of discover? Had you always known about witchcraft and paganism, or did you at some point stumble across it like some people do, like I did, and then like go, "Oh wow, where has this been all my life?"
Right. When I was, third grade, so this would be when I was, I think, 8 or 9, I'd always had a drawing to nature. I think part of that was the way we were raised. But I swiped some oxtail bones. My mother had made stew. I asked to have them. She said, no, what would you do with them? And I took them anyway. And I remember drying them and being very secretive about it, and then taking my pens and just making sigils on the knobs. I had no idea what I was doing. I just felt that compelled to do it.
Right.
And then I would go out and cast them on the grass and try and read them and try and sit and listen. And I didn't understand then. That was just what I felt that I needed to do.
Hmm.
But it wasn't until much later, one of the first books I ever read was Susanna Budapest's book, The Holy Book of Women's Mysteries. And when I read it, I cried because it was like, oh my gosh, I'm not insane. Because there were
Did you
so
ever
many, sorry, go
go ahead?
ahead.
No, keep going. Sorry.
There were so many things in our family that was always hinted at, but there were secrets. Growing up in my household, it was like living in a labyrinth, and you never knew where the Minotaur was. You just
Yeah.
knew that it was there.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of things that were felt but never discussed. And there were things that were hinted at but never openly talked about. So when I read her book, it it was like, oh, here it is. I'm not going crazy. I have been seeing this. I have been experiencing this. My my grandmother on my mother's side was a witch. I still have one of her books, but it was never discussed. My mother had the death site, which we only found about much later on. My sister is very sensitive to colors and vibrations, all sorts of things like that. So it's always been in the family, at least as far as we know about. It just was never discussed. So I think my tripping into Z's book was, I don't want to say fated or inevitable, but it just sort of made sense with my progression.
My mother and her mother had death sight. Now,
Mhm.
did your mom talk to you about it a lot, or was it something that she just alluded to?
I I wish I could point to the conversation that finally made her talk about it because being as she told me, I'm a woman from the South and we Southern women never talk about ourselves, which was true. So I wish I could say this was the conversation that started it, but I remember having a conversation with mom about what she saw, and it blew me away. It was this very, she said that she would describe it as this sort of miasma that she saw among on certain people. And anywhere from about 6 months to a year afterwards, they would die. She saw it with my father. And she never talked about it because it was terrifying. And of course, there's that whole thing about at that point, now this is in the 70s or so, still there was this whole church grip about anything outside of the pale and you're, a Satanist or whatever. So mom never
Hmm.
talked about it until that point. And I was astounded. And then she started telling me stories about her mother's father who saw what was it? I wish I could remember what war, but the story goes really quickly about how my grandmother and her dad were walking in a field one day. He was a farmer, and a wind picked up, and he stopped and he looked and he followed something in the sky. And then he turned to my grandmother and he said, "Now, sissy, don't tell no one, but I've just seen the four horsemen and there's a war coming and your brother's got to go. So, but don't tell your ma because it'll upset her. But I'm telling you because somebody needs to know."
Wow.
And so those are the kind of stories that we heard. But at that point, my grandparents had that grandfather had already passed on, and there was all this sort of stuff, and it just wasn't discussed, just alluded to usually. The stories you tell around the campfire kind of thing. But every
Yeah.
time I noticed that every time my mother spoke of them, there was a certain tone, and it gave me a chill. And not in a spooky chill, but in a this feels familiar chill. I know this feeling. I know this sensation.
I talked to a lot of people, and many people that, that at some point you have to come out to your parents. And many
Oh, yes.
parents, especially of a certain age, are obsessed with the kids conforming and being just like everybody else. And everybody wants your kids to be just like everybody and not have to,
Mhm,
face
mhm,
any scorn or anything that's going to
mhm,
harm the family, blah, blah,
mhm,
blah. I'm sure you know
mhm.
what I'm talking about.
Oh, I do.
So when you, at some point, did you have a conversation with a parent saying, I am now, witch, pagan, whatever you want to
Mhm.
classify it as, and how did they react to that?
Oh my goodness. So when I was 16, I, and this was shortly before I left home. When I was 16, I told my mother that I was a witch, and she just looked me up and down and she goes, "Oh, honey, it's a phase. You'll get through it." And that was all she said about it. Um, because of the relationship between my parents, I don't actually know if she told my dad completely.
Hmm.
I think you always had to approach my dad with some sort of offering. So who knows what sort of conversation they had. But I know that there were kind of things that my dad would poke me about,
Hmm.
but the witchcraft thing itself didn't become a problem, quote unquote problem, until later on in school when there was that whole thing with my being expelled for being a witch and demonic possession and blah blah blah.
Can, is it okay to talk about that, or is that too hot a topic to
Oh
talk
no,
about?
no, no, it's part of my life. So I was in high school. I had friends. I had one friend in particular who was troubled. She was a troubled girl. There was a lot of things going on at home. Looking back on it now with what I do know about mental health care, she was a person in crisis, a child in crisis. But, this was what now? This was the 80s, still not talked about. So she basically pulled a knife on a boy at school. And
Yikes.
then, yeah, it was not good. But I didn't know about this till after the fact because I got pulled into the office because she had told the the adults in charge that I had made her do it through demonic possession. I kid you not. I See, she had seen a knife I had in my purse long, then this was off campus at her house because I grew up with hunters. My dad
Hmm.
was always, you have a knife in your purse, your bag, whatever you need. It's a tool. It's a tool. So
Right.
I didn't think for a minute. I didn't think, honestly. It was like this was something I had always had in my pocket. So it's like, okay. So I don't know what happened with that, how that affected her thinking, but within the week, she brought a knife to school and she pulled it on this boy. And then the ripcord happened, and the people in charge, the adults in charge, began to sort of systematically interrogate people that knew me, my friends, And then I was brought into the office because I was sorry, I don't mean to laugh. This even now as an adult, I find this completely bizarre.
No, I mean
But
if you lived through the 80s,
yeah, oh, the
it's
satanic
sadly like
panic was
it's sadly
very much a
irrelevant.
thing.
I
It was a
imagine that younger
thing.
people listening to this go, "This can't fucking happen."
Oh
But it
no, this was
happened,
a
right? Like,
thing.
we know it happened. Like,
Oh yes. Anyway, but so I was told that I was brainwashing minors and taking over their personalities, that I was demonically possessing minors, and all of the.
I'm
Oh, and
sorry,
here's
but
the.
that's
I
actually,
know,
I mean, how could they have that on paper? Like, that's just
I
so
know,
like,
but of course me, and I've always had a mouth, and I've always had a temper. So the principal is telling me this, and I didn't help myself, but I opened my mouth and I said, let me get this straight. I'm demonically possessing people and I'm brainwashing minors who have no power. If I actually had those abilities, don't you think I would start with, oh, I don't know, the president or you?
yeah, or somebody with like money,
Somebody with
somebody who could
money,
actually do
influence,
something.
right? Exactly. But this went on, and I got death threats. I was expelled from school. There was police harassment. I had an unmarked cop sitting outside my door who was taking notes of who was coming and who was going and all that sort of thing. And this went on for a while. Every time I went back to this place to visit, people, the word would get out, and then inevitably there'd be a cop at my door warning me, talking to me, telling me, "Well, we know that you're here," and blah 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 blah. And the thing of it was, because I grew up with the person who was my father, I was not intimidated or terrified by cops at all, and I think that really infuriated them.
So, so I mean, what eventually happened? Did you guys have to move away, or did this
Oh,
stop, or like,
well, eventually I left because there was really no way. I didn't have the wherewithal or the power or the support to fight against this. I mean, people were hell-bent. I had one parent who showed up weeping and crying that I had clearly brainwashed her son because they had had an argument that morning and he told her to F off. Because normally her son, her precious son, would never speak to her in such a way. So it was a lot of ridiculous stuff like this. And this same kid, his stepdad later cornered me in front of Safeway and threatened to kill me because he knew all about people like me. Yeah. Oh,
this is
I've unfortunately I've dealt with this kind of ridiculousness on a fairly regular basis, which is why I'm not
where was
particularly
this?
afraid.
What town was this in?
Let's just say that it was in California.
Uh, wow, I thought you were gonna say Idaho or
Oh
Montana.
no, no, no. It was in California, not in the
Oh
Bay
dear
Area,
God.
but in California.
That breaks my brain.
Oh, oh
But it
yes.
doesn't, because like that,
No,
I remember
yeah.
the 80s. My parents were called in. I mean, nothing like what you went through at all,
Hmm.
because my parents didn't care. They're like, whatever. They're like, we don't care. Like my parents were like, were very
Hmm.
liberal,
Hmm.
and they were just like,
Oh,
look,
yeah, not my dad.
he's just a nerd. He's not bothering anybody. Fuck off,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the only thing that my dad really seemed to care about, and I remember him screaming at me in the hallways at school, was that I had put another black mark on the family name and had dishonored the family. That's all he cared about. That was all he screamed about, was reputation and honor.
But you didn't literally do anything.
I was different enough.
So that was it. Just being
That was
you.
it. Hmm.
I'm sorry. That's fucked up.
It is, and it was. But the thing of it is, I learned an awful lot from it. It was terrible at the time. It absolutely was. I learned who my friends were and who they were not, because there were a lot of people who were reporting back to the school officials of all the little things that I was doing. An English teacher who had assigned us private and personal journals to write for class that were to be anonymous. She turned mine in to the principal, and they used it as evidence. um, all sorts of things like that.
Do you think if you were able to reach back and see if you can get your school records from this time, you could?
Oh no, because when I ended up going later to finish out my diploma through what is it, adult education, the GED
Hmm.
stuff, I can't
Yeah.
remember the proper. I told the one of the counselors at the time that you're going to have trouble with this. And she called the school, and the school actually at first denied that I had ever gone there. And then they couldn't find my records, and they couldn't
Hmm.
find my records. And she actually finally, I don't remember how, this was a while ago now, but she put some sort of legal lien on and was finally able to get my records somehow magically. So it was, and she was like, "What happened with that?" And I basically told her the whole story, and I mean, like you, her head kind of fell off.
Yeah. I'm just like,
And
wow.
and if I could though, just to a small sidetrack, the interesting thing that I find that after all was said and done, the principal who was trying to do whatever it was, he actually got caught, basically in some sort of taking money from the school illegally. I don't remember the term for it. The
No, no shocker.
No shocker, the counselor who was causing me no end of trouble and the one who had originally accused me of taking over people's personalities, particularly my friends, she got busted for some sort of issue involving illicit behavior in students. I mean, I know all these little things came out, and that I didn't find out till much, much later down the road, but I heard about it through a mutual friend, and it was like, see, this is what happens when you lie.
Yep. It's true.
Um, so I just sort of shrugged my shoulders over it. But yeah, so because of that, I learned really quickly, and although it was a fight, it was really scary to become my own advocate for a lot of things. And it's one of the reasons why I try to be outspoken about witchcraft and the stuff that I do, because I know that unfortunately there are still way too many people who are still in the broom closet.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
I
even
try
in the
and,
here in the Bay Area, which,
oh
you
yeah,
think would be more liberal, we always like to tout
oh
how
no,
liberal it is here. But I
oh
mean,
no,
California sadly is no different from the rest of the country in
no,
that we have pockets of
we absolutely do.
imbeciles running
We
things.
do. We absolutely. I had a girlfriend down in LA of all places who was in a 4 year long divorce battle because her ex kept insisting that she was a bad parent because she practiced witchcraft.
No, that happens even in the Bay Area. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
that's something
it's
that's everywhere.
it's
And
so
people love to throw that around in divorce court and in
they
child
do.
custody
They
cases.
do. They do. It's awful. It's terrible. So, yes, so I'd like to think that, oh, I'm so fearless, but really I'm not. I'm just getting through and getting by. But I try and be there for those who are really and truly terrified and unable to speak where they stand.
Now, did you always practice solo, or did you eventually join some kind of a group or
Oh my
groups
gosh.
or
Well, I
multiple groups?
started I started sneaky and solo because I didn't know. Because I had this what my dad called my rabid feminist phase going on, which by the way, I'm still in the midst in apparently. I joined
A
the
lifelong is a lifelong phase a phase? Is that how does that
right.
categorize a phase? I don't know.
I guess it's a moon phase is what it is. Yes, I go through phases. Yes, just like the moon and the tide. Um, but probably the first official group, I joined a Dianic circle almost immediately, and that worked well for a while. And then later on, this was after the whole thing with the high school. I actually formed my own little group. It was friends. I mean, that's what you do with your friends, right? You get together and you talk about the moon.
Yeah.
And that was, and we actually had a young kid, a minor, who found out about our group and desperately wanted to join. And at that point, I knew about the possible police harassment. So I said, I need a written permission slip from your mother, and I need to be able to speak to your mom and answer any questions or concerns that she has. And I need it signed. And he was like, okay. And I talked to his mom on the phone, and she was this great hippie. She's like, yeah, he's figuring out who he is and what he wants to do. And I'm totally fine with it. And I said, so I have your permission to show this to the police should we have any harassment. And she goes, I will call them myself. She was very supportive and very kind. So when the police did show up, inevitably, because we knew that they would, I showed them the slip. Like, she knows it's legal. It's fine. Bye-bye. Get off my doorstep.
Yeah.
So we formed a little group, and then from there, we joined a more public group, which was it's defunct now, it's long gone, but it was the Mystical Fellowship of Our Lord and Lady. It was led by a gent who was an ex-Catholic uh choir boy, priest. He went up the ladder. I don't know the names of the hierarchy for the Catholic pastors and all of that, so forgive
Yeah, nor
me.
do I.
Um, but he discovered Gardnerian and Alexandrian witchcraft, and so that we worked with those circles for a while. And then my then boyfriend and I became we did the work, and we became high priest and priestess, and that for a while worked for a while until we all ended up homeless, and that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
And then from there, led another private group, another gathering of friends, and then came back down to the Bay Area and joined up several groups here. And the most recent stint was about, let me think now, 8 years ago now, 10 years ago. It's been a minute that I was part of a heathen group.
That's right.
Hmm. And yeah, so I've usually been a part of groups, and when I end up being in a group, I find myself eventually leading it. And that being a group leader for something like that is a lot. There's so much unseen work because a lot of people who are coming into it sometimes project onto you expectations and parental issues and all these sort of things. So it can be dicey, but it helps to be aware of it.
I want to speak. I want to ask you this question for a lot of the
Yes.
younger folk because
Yes.
you and I are old enough. We back
Good.
in the 80s and 90s, there were more Dianic groups, I think,
Yes.
than there are now. Am I
Yes.
wrong in that perception?
Well, I've been out of the Dianic swing for a while now. I know that there are groups, but I think like so many groups, they're having issues with simply staying afloat.
Yeah,
Um,
I think well all
the
groups are. Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
Dianic groups probably have a lot of issues.
Um, and like so many groups, inevitably you have a lot of people with a lot of different issues and communication styles and expectations and goals, and they inevitably fall out. And
Yeah,
leadership changes and things like that happen, and it gets to be a sort of an unfortunate lather, wash, lather, repeat sort of thing.
yeah.
That's part of human nature, but it's one of the big reasons why I finally, particularly after the heathen situation, I was just like, unless I'm invited to a particular thing by particular people, I bow out of being part of a group. And also, honestly, with school, I don't have the time to give it the kind of love and attention that I feel that it would need.
Now this isn't on your list of questions, and this is kind of a random question because I'm just
Sure.
interested.
Yeah.
I think we don't hear enough about Dianic groups, and I've always been a supporter of Dianic groups. I know
Oh,
that a
I
lot of
know.
people have a bias against them because they
Hmm.
feel they're man haters, blah blah blah,
No,
and that I don't feel like that's the case,
no.
or it could be the case. I don't think that's necessarily indicative of Dianic groups, but like
Mm-mm.
I'm very supportive of them, and I think because men are horrible, it needs to be kind of a thing anyway, or
Hmm.
or just for its own reason of just maybe women want to get together. And so, can you talk about Dianic groups and your experience without naming any names, and just kind of
Sure.
like say like the positives that you've experienced as a Dianic witch?
Oh my gosh. So many. I think even now, I think that there needs to be space for people, regardless of how they identify, they need to have spaces to be where they're safe. where
Yeah.
they feel safe, where they feel that they can talk about whatever it is. And I'm not necessarily, talking to like an NA or an AA thing, although those are also absolutely legit. But unfortunately, people need to have spaces where they can talk and be vulnerable without feeling like they're being judged or they're going to be called out. They want to know that they are not hurt, scared, suffering alone. We're still pack animals. We still have that need to be together.
Yeah.
And I didn't find the groups I was with, I didn't find them so much anti-man as more anti-establishment that just
Yeah.
happened to be run by men. And it's easy to cast a very, very broad brush.
Yeah.
And and a lot of the times we'd be mindful to kind of bring that back because so many of the women in the group had children of their own, many of them boys, and they wanted to be mindful of how do I raise my son, my male child, knowing what I know now.
Yeah.
And and a lot of the times the issues and the things that we discussed had very little to do with the men overall. It's not, relationships notwithstanding, because of course we all have issues and problems with that. That can happen. But it was
Yeah.
more like, how do we change this system? What do we do to change this mindset? How do we support women in making big steps, whether it's out of an abusive relationship, whether it's standing upright at a job, whether it's, promoting their business. It was, how do we as women support one another without tearing each other down, treating one another like competition? How do we do that?
If you had the time, let's say, and
Mhm.
you weren't so engaged in just,
Life.
living your life,
Right.
let's say you had time to kill, would you do a Dianic group again, do you think?
Dianic, uh, I don't know. I don't think so, because I think my own personal experiences have gone not past that, but have gone beyond it, but still include it. I did teach a class, oh my gosh, it was a bit ago now. Well, Lori was still alive, so probably somewhere between 5 and 10 years. It was a small group, it was all women, it
That's
was
right, I remember that.
wonderful.
I remember when you were doing that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was wonderful. It was an experience. I was so excited to see my students move on and effective. And I had a couple of conversations like, well, we don't want you to think that we want to be better. I'm like, I don't care about that. I'm thrilled that you have progressed so beautifully and you're making these steps to embrace your life more. I
Yeah.
was excited about that. I didn't, better or not, I didn't care. I was like, this is great. Please move forward. But as for your question, I would I would do a group again, but I'm very particular about people that I spend, excuse me, that I would invest my time and care with. I
Yeah.
think one of the things that many people don't understand, and this is of course my own opinion, about witchcraft is that it's work. That's why I often call it witch work,
Yeah.
because it's work. You get out of it what you put into it. That has certainly been my experience and the people that I've spoken with. And so you, you need to be willing to do it. And I would be willing to do it, but I would honestly, I would probably handpick people because my time is precious and important. And I also kind of joke about how if you come to me and you want me to teach you X, Y, or Z, I would be a case of, have you had a year of theater? Do you have a year of therapy? Can you prove both? Because I don't want class time to suddenly be personal therapy hour. Do you know what I mean?
No, many times coven meetings become that,
And
unfortunately.
that's not to say that I don't understand that sometimes you just got to come in like, oh my gosh, and just sort of get something out of your system. But for me, if I were to do that again, I would have resources available of like, okay, so this is the person that you need to talk to. Contact these folks, speak to this, association, this group, get yourself some help, but do the actual work. It's like when people would ask me for spells. like a love spell, which I have my own issues with,
Hmm.
and all of this work, and I would say, well, here's a spell for you. Have you talked to the person? Have you
They
are
already like you.
yeah, do they like you? Is this something that you want to do? You really want to invest your magical time into someone that you haven't had a conversation with? And even more importantly, have here's another wonderful love spell for you. Start with the face in the mirror.
Yeah.
It's so my teachings are kind of practical, and I've been told rather cutthroat, but it is I do the work that I do because this is what I feel to do.
I don't want to belabor this point, but I just want to talk to because I'm interested in it. But
Yeah,
like,
go ahead.
and I haven't had a chance to talk about this topic with anybody else, so for me, it's very special. But like, as you know, like, and not to make this about myself, but like because I'm an Aries and I gotta be careful of that. Um, you encouraged me to be in a all male pagan group that
Yes.
we created with people you knew, etc.
Simildanach, yes,
Yeah,
lovely
yeah,
group.
and I found all male working to be wonderful.
Hmm.
It was beautiful, actually. It
Yes,
was at its best. It was life changing, and I was
yes.
really, really happy to do it. It sadly unfolded, and I would love to find men I could do a group like that with again because I think when men are positive together and do positive things, it could be really, really awesome.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I've always wanted to do that again. I would live to do that again, but like
Yeah.
it's just really hard to do. I don't know enough male pagans where that could really happen,
Hmm.
but I would love to. But how was it for you, like, to have that space where you're worshiping the goddess with other women? There's no men around, and you're just having that place to be secure and have that love of other women. Like, how did that work for you?
Oh,
I don't mean like specifically. I just mean generally, like
uh,
that
it's
kind of like you know.
it's amazing. It's amazing to be in a room with other people where you are experiencing the divine in however you define it,
Hmm.
where you feel not only the shift in the veils and the change in the air, but you can feel it in your blood and your bones when it shimmers and blows open. And to have that experience with other people who are of a like mind, when they can look around and go, "Oh my gosh, there are my ancestors," or "Oh my gosh, there's this the she there is this there," they have all these experiences in a safe place where they can safely have them. It's mind blowing. I had an opportunity to channel in the great iron crone, the Baba Yaga, and it was mind blowing. So it's a very I think it's one of I like to think that it's one of those things that strengthens you, that puts fire in your backbone and gives strength to your heart, and will, if there are lessons and there are messages and there are things that you need to know to further your walk on your path, whatever it is, in moments like that, oh yes, you will be told.
I want to kind of shift a little bit now and
Sure.
talk about you mentioned heathenry, and I know
Hmm.
that you've been. I just know from like watching over the years because we've known how long have we known each other?
Let's see, how old are our kids?
My oldest is 30, so
Hmm. And mine turned 20. So
oh
it's
God, Jesus Christ, it's
yeah.
been a while.
I
20,
want to
28
say
years?
early 90s, if that's
Yeah,
accurate.
probably 29, 28 years, I think.
Oh, oh dear.
Yeah, yeah.
So
But
we've known each
over the
other a
years,
minute.
I've seen you in different groups.
Hmm.
Now, you don't have to be specific, but like, how is spending in different groups over the years in different practices? How has this informed and influenced your practice, kind of like on your lifelong basis?
Well, my first feeling to that is that it's definitely taught me what I do not want and what
Yeah,
I will not tolerate and what I have no patience for.
good.
I don't suffer fools all that well, so that got sorted out pretty quickly. One of the things that I loved about the heathen community that I was a part of and still consider myself peripherally, I still get invited to do house cleansings and land rites and things like that, is that at least with the heathen group that I was with, a lot of blue collar folks, a lot of military, a lot of teachers, a lot of parents, a lot of cops, just kind of nobody was particularly what you'd call, the upper class, as it were. Although I
Yeah.
don't particularly like using those terms. And I found that we were being part of the heathen community. If you remember Pantheacon, I was part
Yeah.
of the security for that. But a good majority of both the security and the sort of fix-it groups for Pecan were heathens.
Yeah.
And compared to other different types of groups that I've been in, the heathens, because, we are our deeds, did the hard work, lifted the barge, toted that bale, stayed up late, would do the extra hours, and all of these things. And that's not to say that anybody else or any other groups that I've been in with were particularly lacking or slack,
Right.
but the heathens made it a point to do the heavy lifting and at every turn.
Yeah.
And I know that there's a tremendous amount of problems with the thing is, with the white supremacy and things like that. And there's a lot of problems in the heathen community on the whole, but the ones that I experienced and the people that I have worked with and the ones that I am very fortunate to call my friends, that's not them because we do not have that in our heathenry.
So I want to ask you next,
Mhm.
how has your spiritual path influenced your connection with the divine and the natural world in your practice? You talked about growing up with this. Has
Mhm.
this changed or has this strengthened for you?
Oh, nature's always been my church. Uh, that was actually one of the things that I would argue with the Dianic priestess about. Her upbringing was very, very heavily Catholic. So she had the inclination that you had to go to sacred spaces and sacred places to experience whatever it was that you experienced. And I understand that I do because I still think that places where people worship, whatever the stripe, need to be left alone so people can have them to go to be
Right.
safe, to have community. But for me, it's always been nature. Nature accepted me from the get-go. I can't say the same for people. I can't say the same for family, and certainly not community as a whole. Not the pagan community, but just the average community. I found solace in nature that was not offered to me anywhere else. And so it's always been there. I mean, the property I live on now, I have nature abounding everywhere. I have red foxes and possums and trees. And so nature has always been there for me. I've always gravitated towards it. It was an argument I had with my then Gothi, who was rather insistent that I should pick a one of the heathen gods, that I needed to have one. And who did I gravitate towards? And I said, if you're insisting, I will tell you, but you're not going to like the answer. My go-to is the Yggdrasil, the
Hmm.
tree. That is what pulls me. That is what calls me. And we didn't have any further discussion after that.
It's funny. I know so many of these questions answers ahead of time, but I'm asking these for the audience. So it's
Sure.
weird. Some of this seems redundant because I already have talked to you about this so much. But
That's okay. I love talking shop.
yeah, what role does do you have like daily practices for meditation, for rituals, for divination or anything like that?
Honestly, not as much as I would like. I am in the grips of school, and that has eaten up a lot of my brain. But there are things that I pay attention to. I pay attention to signs and portents when an animal shows up in my life unexpectedly. And it could be something a squirrel, a skunk, a hawk, a red fox, I ask myself, who has sent you? What is the message that you're bringing me? What is it that I need to pay attention to, that I need to address? What am I ignoring? What am I not aware of? I do that with some of the, like when we have fog or wind or rain. You know, I go out and I hug my trees. I'm excited.
One of the things I've never really talked about with other pagans on this thing, because I don't think it's something that we like to talk about, but
Hmm.
like I didn't celebrate Imbolc this year because I've just been busy as hell, and
Right.
I bought all these like supplies to make
Hmm.
candles and
Hmm.
stuff, and I was just like
Hmm.
depressed, and I was like
Hmm.
overworked, working 6 days a week,
Right.
and I'm just like I just didn't have time. I mean, I'm gonna make candles today, but like it's what, 2 weeks after Imbolc, so like
Okay.
I I think that oftentimes, people expect pagans to pull out of their ass on a daily basis, and it's really
Right.
frustrating because it's like, oh, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? If you're such a big
Hmm.
pagan, and it's like,
Hmm.
because we have lives too. We don't
Because
live in a
we have
freaking
lives
bubble.
too.
It'd be nice if we lived in the midst of Avalon, Avalon Island, and we could like have this wonderful community where we
Right.
could do whatever we
Yes.
wanted like that. Like, it's not the
Yes.
way it is. We're in the workaday world like everybody else, and we don't have
Hmm.
the church to go to on Sunday and
Hmm.
fall asleep in the pew. So for you, like as busy as you are, and most people don't know you that are listening to the podcast, I can attest that you're exceedingly busy. You're very driven. You work, you go to school, you're a dedicated mother, and you do a lot on the basis. And just going to school alone is a lot of work. And you do a lot of stuff for school. School's not just writing papers. You're doing a lot of stuff. I can attest to that.
Hmm.
So, what can you speak to of like how hard it is to keep? I mean, a day like a yearly practice going when you're just busy as fuck.
Well, I think one of the first things that I am being poked at to say is that, and I'm going to just use this as a general name of the gods to represent divinity, nature, however you deem it. They do not, they don't pressure us for time. We do
Yeah.
that to ourselves. We are
Yes.
the ones who flag and panic at incoming deadlines. We beat ourselves senselessly if we miss something, if we forget something, if we haven't done something just so. They don't care. And it's not that they don't care as in that they're dismissive. They just want us to be there with them in any way. Just even if it's nothing more than light a candle and sit and talk. It doesn't have to be. This is the thing between, I think one of the big things between us pagans overall and say like one of the churches is that our our practices and our beliefs are deeply personal and individual, because those are the relationships that we have with the good neighbors, the unseen ones, the ancestors, whatever it is, whomever it is. We answer and speak with and commune with them, not anybody else's timeline. And time has no importance for them. We're the ones who do it to ourselves, and we do it to each other. We hold up these ridiculous standards and expectations, and everything has to be perfect. Was it fear of missing out and all these other things? And it's not, again, just in my experience, I have found that it's just simply not necessary. And I know if for me, if there's something really crucial or critical that I miss, usually I'll have something come through in a dream, or I will have a voice that speaks to me very, very loudly. I've had quite a few of those that said, okay, are you paying attention now? Do
Yeah.
you hear me now? You need to address this. It's like I find that way with cards, or if I'm throwing runes or whatever it is. It's like, okay, you eventually have to deal with this. Because if you want this to happen, you have to take care of all the steps between where you are and where you want to go and
Yeah.
who you want to be. And I find that they are a lot more patient and forgiving of us than we are of ourselves and one another.
That's true. Now, I'm gonna have to cut that clip out and replay that for myself every day for the rest of my life.
And again, of course, your own mileage may vary, but I have found for me that it's been, if I get out of my own way and I stop and I really listen, particularly if I have a question, I get an answer. I may not like it, but I get an answer. And sometimes it'll even come out of the mouth of a friend. And I'll be like, oh, I'm feeling called out. But then when I sit with it, it's like, oh, no, that was the right message for me.
Yeah. What do you think of some of the misconceptions about paganism from outsiders and even by pagans?
How much time do you have? Um,
Yeah.
okay, so like you, I was a pagan before there was social media. So I'm going to be a horrible curmudgeon as I say this, but social media has been both good and bad for paganism.
Amen.
I think that it's been a great tool for those who need it, who have no way of reaching out or being around other people of like minds. I think that there's online groups that have been hugely beneficial for so many people who are unable to live with their homes or are afraid to speak out loud of what they believe. So I think that that's really critical that we have that. However, there's a whole lot of things that'll pop up. I'm in quite a few witchcraft groups on Facebook. I'm going to admit, but people will come in and ask for blah blah blah, and I was like, well, have you done your research? Have you done your homework? And it's very easy and dismissive to say Google it, because sometimes I don't want to be the emotional labor horse for somebody else's bandwidth.
Yeah, as a librarian, I never encourage people to Google anything.
Right, exactly, because then it's a whole bunch of like, oh no, 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 no.
Yeah.
But um, but because of my background training to be a counselor and a therapist, I always dig a little deeper. And it's like, okay, well, tell me why you're feeling this way. What's going on? I find that we need to address the now and the here and now to help then, to help the work. So I think it's a misconception because people will come to us elders expecting us to have the answers. And a lot of the times we simply don't. I'm of the opinion that the witch work evolves and changes as you do. Now, there are some people who will find their niche early on, stick that flag in the hill, and say, this is me, this is what I do, this is what I believe. And that's great. But a good many of us, we're kind of meandering. And like you were saying, a lot of younger pagans wouldn't believe of the things that we had to deal with back in the day. But we did. And I think that, I think again, we need to remember that paganism is not church.
Yeah.
There is no dogma. There is no hard and fast rules. Of course, unless you are of a particular, tradition, and that's different. But overall, we're not church. We don't punish. We don't damn. We don't condemn. We try not to shame, although I've seen some of that go on. And that's like, okay, stop that.
Hello,
Uh,
Pantheacon.
oh, don't get me started.
Yeah.
And because also in part of the pagan community, we have a lot of people, LGBTQ plus folks. We have a lot of different folks of genders and sexualities and fluids and all sorts of things. And I have found that when I have talked to them, they tell me about how they felt like they'd come home in a sense because it was accepting. But flip side again, there are a lot of people, and I'm looking at you, white supremacist heathenry, that just is the way it is, and people suffer for it. I don't know if that answers your question. I knew I went off on a tangent again. My apologies.
That was a wonderful answer, and I really think it's something we don't really talk about enough,
And we
unfortunately.
need to, if we want
Yeah.
paganism to progress and to progress in the ways that it can really help people, we need to sit down and have these hard discussions, these awkward conversations, and keep talking about them until they're no longer awkward.
Well, to that note, my last question for you would be, what would you like to see for the future of paganism? Say, looking at like your own youngster
Mm.
growing up, and for them, what would you like to? What is the tree you want to plant for future pagans?
That we have, oh gosh, so many things, that there is space and a place for all of us in whatever, however we believe, however, whoever we are. I want the trees that I plant, going with your metaphor, I want the trees that I plant to be made into longer tables. I want the wood of fences to be taken down and to be made into longer tables so
Yeah,
we can all sit down regardless of what we believe and have community. But it's going to take work. And I like to hope that we will get there. It's going to take time. Real and honest, true change takes time. And it'll be hard work and it'll be difficult work. But in the end, I would like to hope that that we'll be together as a community and that we can be supportive and protective and loving and giving and forgiving of each other for simply being human. Hate to sound like a hoary cliche, but bottom line, that's who we are.
yeah. Okay, Nick, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed to get a chance to talk to you here. I mean, I talk to you so much, I think,
Mhm.
not enough as I would like, but I talk to you, about these things. And I mean, I was really right in having you on the podcast because you've been an excellent guest. I hope we get to have you on again so
Oh, yes,
that you can
please.
maybe be part of a panel sometime, and
Oh,
we'll
yes, please.
circle
You know
back to you
me,
on that.
I love talking shop. I will happily blab on about this stuff just endlessly.
Yeah, I
It,
think we don't often hear. We don't have, I think, venues oftentimes to talk enough, I think, with other pagans about these things. And that's why I wanted to have this podcast and have
Mhm.
kind of a coffee talk,
Yeah.
so to
Oh,
speak,
yes.
about paganism. So this has been nice. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I will happily come back.
All right. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Calling the Quarters podcast. That was my guest, Kaynek Young. We will be having another episode next week. Our guest will be TBA. Until then, thank you for being here, and bright blessings to all of you.